Okay, we're in Judges. We're beginning the book of Judges, so I'll spend a few minutes doing an introduction, and then we'll get into it, and we'll be going through chapter 1 through 3. Judges is, the word shaphat is the Hebrew word for judges, and it just means to discern, to regulate, or to direct. And the judges were in a time period from Joshua to King Saul, basically. And there are 13 of them, 13 judges, and it's about a 300 to 400 year, depending on how it's counted, period, somewhere between 1500 and 1000 BC. Israel was a theocracy. God is the king, and the judges would be like deputies raised up for a particular occasion. So they weren't that, it wasn't that there was always a judge over Israel during this time. It was that problems came up, and then a judge would be arisen to handle the problem. And the judges were a little different than like the kings, because there was no pomp around them, or really wealth, or even power, although they received the Spirit from God when God raised them up. So there was some miraculous powers that they had, but it wasn't this pomp that a king would have. They were regular people that were risen up and to become judges. And in the judges, you find this cycle. And the cycle is Israel ignores God and serves idols. Oppressors arise against Israel. Number 3, Israel cries out to God for help. Number 4, the judge is called and installed as a deliverer. And then number 5, the land has rest when they're delivered. And you see this cycle over and over in the book. We're going to talk a little bit more about that, but in a minute here. But what you have is God being just. He requires of their sins, he has a requirement. There is a justice due, but at the same time, God is merciful. And so if you're in these horrible situations that Israel was finding themselves in, they could repent, they could return to God. They didn't have to despair because God is merciful. And this cycle is repeated. As you go through the book of Judges, you just see it over and over again. It's the history of God's long suffering toward his people. And you could say that's the whole Bible, isn't it? I mean, we see that over and over. But in this book, you just see over this period of Judges, over and over, this cycle repeated.
It seems like it's more concentrated, condensed.
That's a good way to put it. It's just like 13 of them packed into there, these cycles of that, yeah. The history is from over 3,000 plus years ago. It's the Hebrew record, and I don't really have to say this, but it's just good to have a record like this that is so, we can trust it. It's a good record of what happened. And I say that because you compare it to the Greek record, and the Greek record of that period of time is put together with poets and storytellers, and it's embellished and it's distorted, and they come up with all kinds of ideas, which storytellers do that. But here we have this 300 to 400 year period that is in God's Word, and it's just been shown to us over and over how accurate and dependable this Word is. And so we have that accurate history. And there's all kinds of very interesting things. You don't have to embellish it. There's wars, there's cruelty, we'll see that today, heroes, adventures, riddles, vows, and then God's hand in dealing with so many different things. In Judges chapter 2 and verse 16, it says, "Then the Lord raised up judges who delivered them from the hands of those who plundered them." So that's that thing that cycle we're going to see. That's that one step where God And the reason for the name of the book, God was raising up these judges. These judges would be filled with God's Spirit, what to do, and or in some cases.
I think one of the things we need to keep in during this period, these judges are from different tribes, and geographically, it's different parts of Israel. It's not all of what we think of as Israel, like in the time of the kings. It's a portion of it. It's treated bad and has a judge, and God gives them a judge. And then geographically, another portion of it will, not necessarily the exact same one they just got done with, will have the same problem again. The people will depart from God, they'll not keep his covenant, and they'll be persecuted, and they'll break God, and God will deliver them.
So true. And today we're going to be mostly in the south. You know, we're starting down there in the Negev up to Jerusalem, pretty much, and then all the way from the coast where the Philistines were to the Dead Sea. So you've got that kind of area to the south that we're really dealing with in the first three judges. So that's true. The other thing about that cycle I wanted to mention is in this cycle where we're going from idolatry to being oppressed to crying for help, and then a deliverer being sent, and then rest coming back, it's not just a cycle, it is spiraling downward. And that's the frustrating thing that you see in this book is as you go through this book, you're going further and further and seeing morality is getting worse. The deterioration and the idolatry is getting worse as you go through these cycles. And why is Israel in trouble? You know, they were given a job to do. Joshua, as they went into the land, what was that job? That's right. Eliminate, drive out the nations, kill them, and they didn't obey. And so it is a lesson too for us to not neglect God's way, His law, His teachings, and to remove sin from our life, and ask ourselves: is there anything that I put in front of God that I'll do before I do what God said? That's an important thing to ask, because that is idolatry. We're placing something. That is that Joshua dies, but really we're going to see a crossover into Judges before Joshua actually dies. So now it came about after the death of Joshua that the sons of Israel inquired of the Lord, saying, "Who shall go up first for us against the Canaanites to fight against them?" And the Lord said, "Judah shall go up. Behold, I have given the land into his hand." So which tribes? They asked God, which tribes? And the Lord's answer, Judah. And then in verse 3, Judah says, "Simeon, will you come with me and help me fight? And then when you have to fight, I'll come help you." So they make a deal to go together. Verse 4, "And Judah went up, and the Lord gave the Canaanites and the Perizzites into their hands, and they defeated 10,000 men at Bezek." So they defeated. Some of the translations for that word use smote, slew, or struck. And the Canaanites, which are Ham's descendants. And as you go through the Bible looking at who are these Canaanites, Numbers 13 says they're strong. Deuteronomy 29 says they're idolatrous. Deuteronomy 18 says they're superstitious. Leviticus 18 says they're wicked. They're a particular type of people. And this is what the Bible description of the Canaanites is. The Perizzites, the word actually means dwellers in unwalled cities. And that's just a point of interest. I'm not going to be making any other point about that. Verse 5, "And they found Adonai-Bezek in Bezek and fought against him, and they defeated the Canaanites and the Perizzites. But Adonai-Bezek fled, and they pursued him and caught him and cut off his thumbs and big toes." there's that cruel, wow, to cripple them so you can't hold a sword or a bow and arrow or a spear, and you can't run anymore. You are just rendered useless almost. But in verse 7, and Adonai-Bezek said, 70 kings with their thumbs and their big toes cut off used to gather up scraps under my table. As I have done, so God has repaid me. So he had used this for 70 kings, or maybe we'd call them vassal kings, that were under him, and make sure that they couldn't hold a sword or a spear or have any power. So they brought him, that's Adonai-Bezek, that king, to Jerusalem, and he died there. Verse 8, then the sons of Judah fought against Jerusalem and captured it and struck it with the edge of the sword and set the city on fire. So here is Jerusalem being fought for and captured and set on fire. So when you look at the history of Jerusalem, you'll see, I can't remember how many times that city was captured and destroyed, but I can't remember. Cindy, do you remember how many times? You dig into that stuff. No? Okay. There's just, I remember it being a high number that so many times when in the digging up of Jerusalem, they find, well, here's another time that it was destroyed. Well, here is one of the times. Verse 9, and afterward the sons of Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites living in the hill country and in the Negev and in the lowlands. So here you've got that, if you think of the map with the Philistines were up against the Mediterranean Sea, and then on the other side you've got the Dead Sea, and you've got the hill country and the lowlands, and which are sometimes called the Shephelah, and then the Philistines living along the coast, like Gaza would be that area. And then down to the Negev, which is the desert, so that'd be kind of below the Dead Sea. Verse 10, so Judah went against the Canaanites who lived in Hebron. Now the name of Hebron formerly was Kiriath Arba, and they struck Sheshai and Ahiman and Talmai. These are the sons of Anak. And we'll make a point here in just a moment here. There's a mosque down in the town where Hebron, and it's in the town of Hebron, but it's not called that. It's called El Khalil. And the word El Khalil means friend. And this is where Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and their wives were buried. And of course, Abraham is called the friend of God. And so this mosque down that is El Khalil, or in the town of El Khalil, and it's called, the name is friend. So Hebron was Kiriath Arba, and Arba, Kiriath means town. Arba is a person, and it's actually the father of Anak. And we just read about the three sons of Anak that went against the Canaanites, and those three sons of Anak. Verse 11, then from there he went against the inhabitants of Debir. Now the name of Debir formerly was Kiriath Sefer. So there another one is Kiriath Sefer, which is town of the scribe. So verse 12, and Caleb said, the one who attacks Kiriath Sefer and captures it, I will even give him my daughter Aksah for a wife. So, and Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, captured it, so he gave him his daughter Aksah for wife. So Caleb, remember of Joshua and Caleb, the two spies with the good report? Caleb has a daughter, her name is Aksah, and Caleb has a brother whose name is Kenaz, and that brother has a son, Othniel. And Othniel took that city, which probably was a hard one to take. That's why he offered his daughter, and he wins her for a wife. Verse 14, then it came about when she came to him, that is, Aksah went to her dad, she came to him, that she persuaded him to ask, or no, she persuaded him, Othniel, to ask her father for a field. Then she alighted from her donkey, and Caleb said to her, what do you want? And she said to him, give me a blessing. Since you have given me the land of the Negev, give me also springs of water. So Caleb gave her the upper springs and the lower springs. So there is actually today, you can go, there is a valley among that dry, barren hills in the Negev, down south of Hebron. And there's these pastures that there's two valleys, a lower and an upper one, and they're watered by a spring. And the village there that they're at is Dewir, which is real close to Debir. So it sounds like we're looking at that same area that we can look at geologically and see that fits. Verse 16, and the descendants of the Kenite, Moses' father-in-law, okay, that was Jethro. So Jethro's children were, or through them came the Kenites, went up from the city of palms with the sons of Judah to the wilderness of Judah, which is in the south of Arad, and they went and lived with the people. This is the city of palms. Has been referred to Jericho. And you're looking at this and you go, wait, Jericho was destroyed. And there's a thought that this might be talking about the En-Gedi, which is along the Dead Sea, and there's some springs there that could, and there's some palm trees there. It could be that. So, verse 17, then Judah went with Simeon, his brother, and they struck the Canaanites living in Zephath and utterly destroyed it. So the name of the city was called Hormah. And Judah took Gaza with its territory, and Ashkelon with its territory, and Ekron with its territory. Now the Lord was with Judah, and they took possession of the hill country, but they could not drive out the inhabitants of the valley because they had iron chariots. Okay, so here you start seeing they're going in, they're destroying, and this is before the judges have arrived. They're going in and they're starting to make some decisions here. Oh, they have iron chariots. Can't do that. Well, yes, they could. There's a problem there. There was the beginnings of that. Okay, we're not going to. This is too much for us. So.
Problem is they don't have faith.
That's exactly it. They don't have faith. Verse 20, and they gave Hebron to Caleb as Moses had promised, and he drove out from there the three sons of Anak that we read about in verse 10. But the sons of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites who lived in Jerusalem. So the Jebusites have lived with the sons of Benjamin in Jerusalem to this day. In Joshua chapter 15 and verse 63, it says, now as for the Jebusites, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the sons of Judah could not drive them out. So the Jebusites live with the sons of Judah at Jerusalem until this day. So there you can see the crossover here between the book of Joshua and Judges. To this day. Verse 22, likewise the house of Joseph went up against Bethel. Now the house of Joseph would be his sons. That's what I would figure, Ephraim and Manasseh. Went up against Bethel, and the Lord was with them, and the house of Joseph spied out Bethel. Now the name of the city was formerly Luz. And the spies saw a man coming out of the city, and they said to him, please show us the entrance to the city, and we will treat you kindly. So he showed them the entrance to the city, and they struck the city with the edge of the sword. But they let the man and all his family go free. And the man went into the land of the Hittites and built a city and named it Luz, which is its name to this day. So there they do that same kind of thing that they did for at Jericho and save that family. Bethel was named by Jacob back in Genesis 28, and Bethel means house of God. And so you have Canaanites moving in, and that has that name with El, as in Elohim, Beth El. And no, we're not going to keep that name. Well, now they've renamed it Bethel here at the house of God. In Joshua 15, which we just referred to, there are 123 cities mentioned there that are taken, plus their villages. And a lot of times the villages surrounding a city will be, 8 or 10 villages. So Joshua 15 makes this list of 123 and all their villages. And so this is what they have been doing, and this is mostly towards the south, below Jerusalem, down to the Negev, and over to the Gaza, and where the Philistines were on the coast. But you have these two, you have the iron chariots. There's doubt and fear. They didn't, they looked at those iron chariots, and they're invincible, and forgetting that God had promised. The Jebusites were not eliminated. And now in verse 27 through 36, you've got a list of a whole bunch of places that they didn't do their job. In verse 27, you got Bet Shean, Tanakh, Dor, Ibleam, and Megiddo, and their villages. And the Canaanites continued to live in them. In verse 28, and it came about when Israel became strong that they put the Canaanites to forced labor, but they did not drive them out completely. They didn't do the job. They didn't finish the job. Verse 29, neither did Ephraim drive out the Canaanites who were living in Gezer. So the Canaanites lived in Gezer among them. Verse 30, Zebulun did not drive out the inhabitants of Kitron or the inhabitants of Nahalal. So the Canaanites lived among them, became subject to forced labor. Asher did not drive out the inhabitants of Akko. And so, verse 32, the Asherites lived among the Canaanites. So Asher, the inhabitants of the land. Verse 33, Naphtali did not drive out the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh or the inhabitants of Bethana. And so the Canaanites continue. And here you have 20 plus listed as not, plus their villages, listed as not driving out the Canaanites. And
all around most of these after verse 27, farther north also, not down in the south still.
Well, that's true. At least that Bet Shean, that's in the middle, and Ibleam, Megiddo, and Tanakh are right in kind of the Samaria, Samaria.
I was just thinking of the inheritance of Naphtali and Zebulun and Dan.
Right.
And they were up further north.
That's true. That's true. Okay. So next week you put a map up there and show us, all right?
You're thinking of your counterpart, my son, the guy with all the maps.
No. Verse 34. So really, up till now, well, we have Dan here too. Then the Amorites forced the sons of Dan into the hill country, and for they did not allow them to come down to the valley. But you have all the tribes mentioned except for Gad, Reuben, Issachar, and Levi. Those aren't mentioned yet. But you've got this long list of falling short of doing what God asked them to do. Let's go on to chapter 2.
Oliver, I have one question for you. On verse 16, it says the descendants of Kenites, Moses' father-in-law, led us to the city of all the sons of Judah. Back in Genesis or Exodus, don't we find that Moses' father-in-law was a Midianite priest? Like the Midianite and Canaanite the same, or like these?
I'm not sure. I don't know the answer to that. Yeah, I think you're right in the Midianite priest. And how is that connected to the Kenites? I looked in Numbers. Let me see if that'll give us an answer. Numbers 10.
Well, his family did go with Israel when they left. They
Right.
went north, when they went to the promised land.
Two names the same.
Okay, then Moses said to Hobab the son of Reuel the Midianite, Moses' father-in-law, we are setting out to the place of which the Lord said, I will give it to you. Come with us, and we will do you good, for the Lord has promised good concerning Israel. I will not come. But he said, I will not come, but rather will go to my own land and relatives. I think that's what you're referring to here. That's not giving me the answer, so yeah, I'm not sure. Okay. Now, in here, so Israel is now being rebuked. We've had this long list of ignoring God or being scared or whatever it was. Their lack of faith, I think, would cover it. Now, the angel of the Lord came up from Gilgal to Bochim, and he said, I brought you up out of Egypt and led you into the land which I have sworn to your fathers, and I said, I'll never break my covenant with you. And as for you, you shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of this land. You shall tear down their altars, but you have not obeyed me. And what is this you've done? So this is, of course, the angel of the Lord, which a very good argument that that's talking about Jesus. I can't say for sure, but it sure seems that way when you put all the verses that concern the angel of the Lord, that this is deity. He's up from Gilgal. I'm not gonna go there but the promise was made to Abraham that. And God is saying, I will be faithful. That promise of the land, the number of people, and that all nations of the earth would be blessed. That threefold promise. And here was the land, the promise of coming into the land. You will inherit the land. But in verse 3 it says, therefore I also said, I will not drive them out before you, but they shall become as thorns in your side, and their God shall be a snare to you. You'll get the land, but there's going to be thorns and snares from what you've done. What they didn't do, right.
They didn't do what God told them to do.
Right. That's a good point to make there, what they didn't do. And verse 4, and they came about when the angel of the Lord spoke these words to the sons of Israel, that the people lifted up their voices and wept. They knew. They wept. So they named the place Bochim, which means weepers, and there they sacrificed to the Lord. And actually Bochim is very close to Shiloh, and Shiloh was where the tabernacle was at that time. So here we get to verse 6. When Joshua had dismissed the people, the sons of Israel went each to his inheritance to possess the land. So they returned to their inheritance, and the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who survived Joshua, who had seen all the great work of the Lord, which he had done for Israel. Here's those who had seen this, and there is a degree of service that they've done, but they've not done it all. Verse 8, then Joshua, the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. So there we see it, the third time that's mentioned. In verse 9, and they buried him in the territory of his inheritance in Timnath-Heres in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gaash. So there's where Joshua is buried. Verse 10, and all that generation also were gathered to their fathers, and there rose another generation after them who did not know the Lord, nor yet the work which he had done for Israel. So Joshua's generation dies, and there's a new generation. They don't know the Lord. And it's so sad. I think we...
Do you interpret this as the third generation out of Egypt? There was the one that got God's message at Sinai. There was the generation that got the message in Deuteronomy, just before they went into
I,
It died off.
that makes sense because you have this generation has been in the land now for a certain amount of years. I'm not sure how many, but Joshua was 110, and he was what, 80 when he came into the land, somewhere around 80 or 85.
30 or 40 years.
So yeah, so it's been that many years, and that would be. So I'm not sure what the answer to that is either, but I think you have what you do know about this generation is they saw God's hand at Jericho and at different places, that this is God doing this. And we're getting at the end of this generation, where this generation is dying out, and these new people, they didn't know, they didn't see those things. They should have known, but they didn't see them. So, and it's just, how many times has God in his word told us to tell your children? All the Passover and the feasts were there to remind the people of what God had done. And we have the Lord's Supper for the same purpose. We take the Lord's Supper and we remember every week over and over. Remember what Jesus did for us? And it's something that can keep that alive. But it's so sad because sometimes we see it happening in our families, our children, or the church, as it can. But God has made the provisions for us to avoid that. He's given us the Lord's Supper in the church here, and he's given us those reminders to keep telling your children.
Back to Charlie's question before, from what I can tell, and I'm not sure, but that the Kenites were the tribe where Jethro was the priest of Midian, which was the place where they were staying.
Oh,
So he was the priest in this place, but he was of the tribe of the Kenites.
I see. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Verse 11, then the sons of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals. And they forsook the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt, and followed other gods among the gods of the peoples who were around them, and bowed themselves down to them. Thus they provoked the Lord to anger. So here they actually turned to Baal, to the idolatry. Baal, and it says to serve the Baals, plural, and Baals is it's idols, but it was usually attached to something. There's Baal Zephon, Baal Peor, Baal Shemayan, and Baal Zebub, and so all were part of Baal, and so they would refer to that idol as the Baals because it was attached to certain towns or people or.
Well, the only monotheistic religion around was Judaism. Everything else was polytheism.
Yeah.
They had lots of gods.
Yeah, right. And we're going to hear again soon about the Ashtoreth too. Verse 13, so they forsook the Lord and served Baal and the Ashtoreth, and the anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and he gave them into the hands of the plunderers who plundered them, and he sold them into the hands of their enemies around them, so they could no longer stand before their enemies. And so God it's like he's handing over the people to these their enemies, and he's saying, "You're not my people. You're serving the Baals. You're serving idols. I'm not your God." And to the heathen nations, he's saying, "Take them. They're yours. They're not mine." And wherever they went, the hand of the Lord was against them for evil, as the Lord had spoken, as the Lord had sworn to them, so that they were severely distressed. Then the Lord raised up judges who delivered them from the hands of those who plundered them. So there you see the severity and the justice of God, but right away, he's ready to forgive. He's ready to show pity and deliver. And they did not. Then they did not listen to their judges, for they played the harlot after other gods and bowed themselves down to them. They turned aside quickly from the way in which their fathers had walked in obeying the commandments of the Lord. They did not do as their fathers. And then the Lord raised up judges for them, and the Lord was with the judge and delivered them from the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. For the Lord was moved to pity by their groaning because of those who oppressed and afflicted them. So God heard the groans, he had pity, and he sends these judges. Verse 19, but it came about when the judge died that they would turn back and act more corruptly. So there you see that descending spiral downward. As they made that cycle, it would get worse. Things would get worse than their fathers in following other gods to serve them and bow down to them. They did not abandon the practices to their stubborn ways. So the anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and he said, because this nation has transgressed my covenant which I commanded their fathers and has not listened to my voice, I also will no longer drive out before them the nations which Joshua left when he died. So those inhabitants continued to possess the land. And it's what is the purpose of it? Verse 22, in order to test Israel by them, whether they keep the way of the Lord to walk in it. It's just another way that God uses to bring people back. I'll send a judge to be your deliverer. I will leave you to the choice you've made, hoping that you'll come to your senses. Or I'll test you. These are all to bring Israel back. Will you obey or not? Chapter 3, now these are the nations which the Lord left to test Israel by them, that is, all who had not experienced any of the wars of Canaan, only in order that the generations of the sons of Israel might be taught war, those who had not experienced it formerly. Did they have to be good warriors when they came into the land with the promise of God? No. God was with them. But as God turns them back over to their ways and their choice, you got to learn how to fight now, because I'm not with you anymore.
Well, it's not the first time that God's treated them that way.
Mm-hmm.
It's at least the third.
At least what?
At least the third time that God's treated them that way. If you don't want to do what I tell you to do, I'm not going to be with you.
Right. Only in order that the generation of the sons of Israel might be taught war, those who had not experienced it formerly. These nations are the 5 lords of the Philistines. That's Gaza, Ashdod, Askelon, Gath, and Ekron. Aren't those cities? Yeah, they are. They're the lords of those. That's where it came from, their names. And the Canaanites and the Sidonians and the Hivites who lived in Mount Lebanon from Mount Baal Hermon as far as Lebo Hamath. And they were for testing Israel to find out if they would obey the commandments of the Lord, which he had commanded their father through Moses. Okay, you've tried it your way, Israel, without God's help, and he's testing them. And the sons of Israel lived among the Canaanites and these tribes, and they took their daughters for themselves as wives, and they served their gods. So what would happen if they had done originally and removed those people from the land? They would not have lived among them, they would not have married them, and they would not have served their God. And the sons of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and forgot the Lord their God, and served the Baals and the Ashtaroth. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, so that he sold them into the hands of Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia. So here he delivers them to this. They become forced heavy tribute to this king. We'll call him King Cushan, and it says in verse 8, they served Cushan 8 years. So here is that oppression that they feel, and And when, verse 9, and when the sons of Israel cried to the Lord, there's that cycle again, the Lord raised up a deliverer from the sons of Israel to deliver them, Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. So there's Othniel, the first judge. After 8 years of oppression, Israel cries out, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he judged Israel. When he went out to war, the Lord gave Cushan into his hand so that he prevailed over Cushan. Then the land had rest for 40 years. So there's that first cycle completed. It ends in 40 years of rest. Verse 12. Now the sons of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord. So the Lord strengthened Eglon, the king of Moab, against Israel, because they had done evil in the sight of the Lord. And he gathered to himself the sons of Ammon and Amalek, and he went and defeated Israel, and they possessed the city of palm trees. That's either Jericho or En-Gedi, but Jericho doesn't exist, so it might have been the area around Jericho. And the sons of Israel served Eglon, the king of Moab, 18 years. So here's an 18-year oppression under Eglon. Verse 15, but when the sons of Israel cried to the Lord raised up a deliverer, judge number 2, Ehud, the son of Gera, the Benjamite, a left-handed man. And the sons of Israel sent tribute to him, to Eglon, the king of Moab. So he raises up Ehud. Ehud made himself a sword which had 2 edges, a cubit in length, and he bound it on his right thigh under his cloak so that he could grab it with his left and pull it out. And he presented the tribute to Eglon, king of Moab. Now, Eglon was a very fat man. And it came about when he had finished presenting the tribute that he sent away the people who had carried in the tribute. But he himself turned back from the idols which were at Gilgal and said, I have a secret message for you, O king. And he said, keep silence. And all who attended left him. And Ehud came to him while he was sitting alone in his cool roof chamber. And Ehud said, I have a message from God for you. And he rose from his seat, and Ehud stretched out his left hand, took the sword from his right thigh, and thrust it into his belly. And the handle also went in after the blade, and the fat closed over the blade, for he did not draw the sword out of his belly, and the refuse came out. Then Ehud went out in the vestibule and shut the doors of the roof chamber behind him and locked them. So here's this event where he kills the oppressing king. When he had gone out, his servants came and looked, and behold, the doors of the roof chamber were locked, and they said, he's only relieving himself in the cool room. And they waited until they became anxious. But behold, he did not open the doors of the roof chamber. Therefore they took the key and opened them, and behold, their master had fallen to the floor dead. And now Ehud escaped while they were delaying, and he passed by the idols and escaped to Seirah. And it came about when he had arrived that he blew the trumpet in the hill country of Ephraim, and the sons of Israel went down with him from the hill country, and he was in front of them. And he said to them, pursue them, for the Lord has given your enemies, the Moabites, into your hand. So they went down after him and seized the fords of the Jordan opposite Moab, and did not allow anyone to cross. And they struck down at that time about 10,000 Moabites, all robust and valiant men, and no one escaped. So Moab was subdued that day under the hand of Israel, and the land was undisturbed for 80 years. And so then you have that cycle being completed again, and then you have one verse, verse 31, that refers to the third judge, Shamgar. And after him came Shamgar, the son of Anath, who struck down 600 Philistines with an ox goad, and he also saved Israel. And he is mentioned in the Song of Deborah, but that's all. Just that it's this verse and then one verse, chapter 5 and verse 6, where he's mentioned. And so there you have the first 3 judges of Israel. Of Israel. So Rex is going to bring us the next 2. So thank you. I know.
We wonder where we are in the cycle, serving God and not serving God.
Yeah. No, it's